I didn't think much about the will at first. My mother had passed away a week ago, and the grief was still a raw, throbbing thing, gnawing at the edges of every waking moment. She'd always been the heart of the house, the only one who really understood me. The rest of the family? They were busy living in their perfect, pristine world, too polished to notice the cracks I had long since learned to ignore. Dad called me into his study to go over the will. I had expected the usual, "We need to finalize the estate, Nathan. You know, the house, the paperwork." But the moment I laid eyes on the thick envelope, sealed with my mother's signature, something felt off. "We need to talk about her assets," Dad said, his voice cold. "I'm the executor now, but there's a lot to sort through. Your mother's decisions weren't always practical." I barely listened. I knew the drill. He'd manage everything. He always did. But when he handed me the will, I noticed it wasn't just the house. It wasn't just the small savings she'd left behind. There was more. Much more. I tried to push the anxiety down, tried to focus on the words as I unfolded the document. My heart pounded with each line, each clause. But then, there it was, the twist that I wasn't prepared for. Her house, the house I grew up in, wasn't just left to Dad, as I had always assumed. No. She had written it in a way that ensured it couldn't be sold without my consent, even after her death. "That's not possible," I said, my voice thick with disbelief. "Your mother didn't trust me with everything. You're the one who has to sign off now." I knew she'd always worried about him, about his control over everything, his obsession with security. She'd often warned me, "If something happens to me, promise me you'll protect the house." I had thought it was just her fear talking, but now, in black and white, her wishes were clear. I stared at the paper, feeling a lump form in my throat. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready to fight for something I didn't even want. But there was more. I flipped to the next page, the next clause, and it hit me, she had left something else. An unexpected twist, something far more valuable than property. Something that would change everything. "Dad," I looked up, trying to make sense of it. But his face was already hardening, the usual smirk creeping across his lips. He knew. He always knew. "You always were too soft, Nathan," he muttered, looking away. "Your mother was idealistic." I felt the walls close in. My life, this small, simple life I had crafted for myself, was slipping through my fingers. This was no longer about grieving. This was about survival. There was a large sum of money I had no idea existed, money I was now entitled to. And worse, the will stated that it was to be divided equally between me and Dad, but only if I agreed to the terms. The pressure in the room was suffocating. This was about more than just money. This was about power, control, and a legacy that I didn't ask for but was now trapped in. "I can't just give this up," I said, my voice shaking. But even as the words left my lips, I knew I had no choice. "Then you'll have to fight for it," Dad said coldly, eyes narrowing. "But be prepared for what comes next. It won't be easy." And that's when I realized this was more than a simple inheritance dispute. This was about family secrets, buried lies, and the legacy my father had carefully constructed over the years. A legacy that now, just like my mother's death, was unraveling at the seams. I had no idea just how deep the hole went, but I was about to find out. The court date was set. And in the shadows, someone was already watching me, waiting for me to make my move. The first move was mine to make. And it was the only chance I had left to control the narrative. But was it too late to take back control of everything I had lost? The courthouse loomed before me, its cold stone facade a stark reminder that everything in my life had just shifted. The parking lot was filled with the typical humdrum of everyday business. But for me, this wasn't just any ordinary day. It was the day that would determine the rest of my life. My father had already arrived, I could feel it. The whispers of the town, the ones I had always ignored, now seemed louder than ever. I adjusted my tie in the rearview mirror. There was no going back now. My lawyer, Sam, had prepped me as best as he could, but I still felt like I was walking into a lion's den. My dad had always been a man of power. Wealth, charm, and manipulation were his tools of control. Now, I was about to see just how far that power reached. "You sure you want to do this, Nathan?" Sam's voice echoed from the passenger seat. He always spoke like a man who had seen too many cases like this and had learned to be cynical in the process. "I have no choice." Sam didn't respond immediately, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. "You're walking into a battlefield. People don't forget, especially when money's involved." I didn't need to be reminded of the stakes. A glance out the window told me everything I needed to know. The town was buzzing. Everyone knew what was coming. I could feel the eyes on me, even though they weren't there. Dad had made sure of that, using the scandal to his advantage long before today. The moment I stepped out of the car, I could already hear the murmurs. People talked like they had a right to know what was going on in my family. Maybe they did. But I didn't care. Not anymore. Inside, the courthouse smelled like musty paper and cold metal. The waiting room was filled with people, their faces as tired and beaten down as the building itself. In the corner, I spotted Dad. His signature smile was plastered across his face, as if he had already won. And next to him stood her, the pregnant mistress. I couldn't help but stare. She was younger, more vibrant than I remembered. She had that air about her, the kind that said she knew exactly what she was doing and didn't care who saw. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, drawing attention. A statement. And she knew it. Dad caught my eye and flashed that smile of his, the one that made me feel like a stranger in my own family. "Nathan," he said, his voice too loud, too rehearsed. "You made it. How nice of you to join us." The mistress giggled, leaning into him like a well-rehearsed prop in his performance. "I'm sure you're excited for today, sweetheart. Big day for the family, huh?" I clenched my jaw and stayed silent. The air was thick with tension, but I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of showing it. I just nodded, trying to ignore the growing nausea in my stomach. We sat down across from each other, the distance between us filled with years of resentment, betrayal, and secrets. The judge walked in shortly after, an older man with a deep frown that suggested he'd seen too many cases like this. As he took his seat, I could feel the heaviness in the room. "Let's get started," he said, adjusting his glasses. The proceedings were a blur, papers shuffled, objections raised, and my father's voice cutting through it all like a knife. But it was when the DNA results were mentioned that everything changed. Sam stood up, pulling a small envelope from his briefcase. "Your Honor, we have the DNA results here," he said, his voice steady. I could feel the shift in the air. Everyone in the room knew this was the moment. The twist. The reveal. Dad's face hardened for just a split second, but he recovered quickly, a smirk creeping back onto his face. "What's this?" he asked, his voice sharp. "We don't need any of that nonsense today." But the judge didn't entertain his protest. "We'll need to review this," he said, holding the envelope like it was something far more dangerous than a simple piece of paper. As the judge opened the envelope, I could see the color drain from my father's face. The room fell into a heavy silence, the kind where you could hear every heartbeat, every breath. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to say something, anything. But I knew better than to break the silence. The truth was finally coming out, and I was ready for it. "Mr. Hall," the judge said, looking up from the papers. "It seems there's a discrepancy here. According to these results, the child your partner is carrying is not biologically yours." The words hit like a bullet. My father's face turned ghostly white, his smirk replaced with confusion, then panic. The mistress's hand trembled, her smile faltering for the first time. The dad started, but his voice cracked. "That's impossible." The courtroom was deadly still. The judge didn't even flinch. "I'm afraid the results are conclusive," he said, looking down at the papers again. "This complicates matters considerably." I could feel my pulse racing. my father was finally on the back foot. For the first time in my life, I saw him scared. And that scared me more than anything. But I wasn't about to let him win, not now. Not when the truth was finally slipping through the cracks of his carefully constructed facade. As the proceedings continued, I could feel the weight of what was happening. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power, about control, about everything he had stolen from me over the years. "I'll make sure you pay for this," my father muttered under his breath as the bailiff called for a short recess. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth had already been exposed. The next move was mine. I had no idea how deep this rabbit hole went, but I was about to find out. The judge's words echoed in my head. "The child your partner is carrying is not biologically yours." The courtroom was too still, like the air had been sucked out of the room. My father, who had never been caught off guard in his life, now sat there, his hands trembling, his mask of control slipping. The mistress beside him, the one who had been flaunting her pregnancy like a trophy, looked as if she might collapse right there. Her hand went instinctively to her belly, as if protecting the lie that had kept her afloat in my father's world. I could feel the heat rising inside me. It wasn't the shock that got to me, it was the years of manipulation, the endless lies, the control he had held over my every move. But now, he was finally exposed. And the truth, as it always does, had a way of sneaking into the most carefully constructed walls. "What do you mean, not his?" My father spat, his voice louder now, but there was no conviction in it. "This is absurd. This is a setup." The mistress's eyes darted nervously from me to the judge. "There must be some mistake. This isn't right." "He's the father," she whispered, her voice trembling with panic. I saw the cracks, the real fear, for the first time in my father's eyes. And it felt good, in a way, but something inside me nodded me. This wasn't just about the paternity test anymore. There was something more. Something deeper. The judge, unmoved by the commotion, pushed his glasses up his nose and leaned over the papers. "We will need to investigate this further, but for now, I think it's clear that we cannot proceed with the assumption that Mr. Hall is the father. We will need to reconvene after further examination." The murmur in the room was immediate. The whispers started, and people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I didn't care about the whispers. I didn't care about anything but seeing him squirm. Seeing the man who had destroyed my life finally pay for it. I stood up, adjusting my jacket. "This isn't just about the child," I said, my voice steady but filled with the kind of cold conviction I hadn't known I was capable of. "This is about everything you've taken from me, from Mom." I could see the shock in his eyes. The audacity of me, standing there, speaking up. He had always dismissed me, always told me to stay quiet, stay small. Well, now I wasn't. The mistress let out a shaky laugh. "You're just upset because you don't have a claim to the estate. This is all about money. You're just trying to get revenge." I didn't even bother responding. Her words were poison, trying to sting, trying to control the narrative. But they wouldn't work. Not today. Sam, my lawyer, placed a hand on my shoulder and leaned in. "You're pushing too hard, Nathan," he whispered. "The truth is coming out, but you need to let the legal process unfold. Don't provoke him." I shook my head. "You don't understand. This isn't just about the inheritance anymore. This is about him thinking he could take everything from us. Take everything from me." The tension in the room thickened. I could feel my heart pounding. There was so much at stake, more than I'd ever realized. It wasn't just the inheritance. It was the years of living in the shadow of a man who had never truly seen me. Who had never cared. I walked past my father, who now seemed so much smaller, so much more human. The confident, arrogant figure that had ruled my life for so long was finally showing his true face. As I turned to leave, I noticed a familiar face in the back of the courtroom. A man I hadn't seen in years. Nolan. Nolan was one of Dad's old associates, someone I'd only ever met in passing. I had no idea why he was here, but I could feel his eyes on me. Not just watching, but studying. The kind of look that made my skin crawl. Sam noticed too. "Keep your distance from him," he muttered. "He's trouble." I wanted to ask more, but the moment was too heavy. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. There was a storm coming, and I could feel it brewing just beneath the surface. The doors to the courtroom closed behind me with a heavy thud. I stepped out into the hallway, the sound of my footsteps echoing down the cold, sterile corridor. I was alone now. But I wasn't really. I could feel the eyes on me. The whispers were just beginning. And I knew that this was only the beginning. The world I had known was slipping away. My father's empire was crumbling. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for the truth that would come with it. But it was too late to turn back now. The path had been set, and I was walking it. Nolan was the least of my worries. The real storm was just beginning. The air in the courtroom felt heavier as I stood there, watching my father squirm. His earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by a palpable fear that I hadn't expected. He looked smaller now, almost fragile. The man who had ruled over my life with an iron fist, who had kept his secrets locked away for decades, was unraveling right before my eyes. "Order," the judge's voice boomed, slamming his gavel onto the desk. I glanced at Sam, who was sitting next to me, expression unreadable. He had warned me about pushing too hard, but I couldn't stop now. This was bigger than the inheritance. This was about everything I'd lost over the years, the lies, the manipulation, the power he'd exerted over me, over my mother's memory. I turned my gaze back to my father. The silence in the room was suffocating. "I think we've heard enough for today," the judge said. "But Mr. Hall," he paused, his gaze flicking over the papers in front of him, "there are still serious questions about your conduct during your wife's estate administration." My father straightened in his seat, his eyes narrowing. "That's all in the past. All of this is nonsense. Let's move forward. I'm trying to protect my family." I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes. He had never been good at hiding his emotions, especially when the walls were closing in. The mistress, still clinging to him like a lifeline, whispered something in his ear. I could see her hand trembling slightly, her nails digging into his sleeve. She wasn't as sure of herself now, her confidence slipping with each word the judge spoke. It was all unraveling, and I wasn't going to let it stop. Not now. Not after everything he'd taken from me. The judge continued, seemingly unfazed by the outbursts. "Mr. Hall," he said, looking directly at my father. "I've also been made aware of several financial discrepancies in the estate. Large withdrawals, unauthorized transfers. Some of these funds have been traced back to gambling establishments." The room seemed to hold its breath. I saw my father's jaw clench. His hand gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. "That's absurd," he muttered, voice strained. Those were just expenses. Personal expenses." He was lying, of course. He wasn't fooling anyone, especially not the judge. But before anyone could speak, a man entered the courtroom, his presence immediately drawing attention. I hadn't expected to see him today, and the moment he stepped through the door, I felt my pulse quicken. Nolan. The same man I had seen earlier in the hallway. He was one of Dad's old associates, someone who had always been on the periphery of our family's business. I didn't trust him. His eyes flicked toward me as he took a seat in the back, his gaze lingering a bit too long. A moment later, he whispered something to my father, and I saw the tension in Dad's shoulders ease, just a fraction. But that was enough. I couldn't shake the feeling that Nolan knew something. He was involved. Somehow. I wasn't sure yet how, but I would find out. "Your Honor," Sam's voice cut through the tension. "I would like to submit evidence of the large cash withdrawals from Mr. Hall's account, as well as the payments made to various casinos." The judge nodded, taking the papers Sam handed him. He didn't need to say it aloud, but the implication was clear. This was no longer just a matter of inheritance. It was a criminal case. My heart pounded in my chest. The stakes were higher than I had anticipated. I had thought this would be a battle for my mother's estate, a fight to protect what she had left behind. But now it was a fight for my family's very future. And I was standing at the center of it. "Mr. Hall," the judge said, voice sharp. "You are in serious violation of your fiduciary duty. I will be requesting a full forensic audit of all your accounts. And if the allegations are true, I will be forced to refer this case for criminal investigation." I saw the color drain from my father's face. He couldn't hide it now. The truth was coming for him. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about everything he had built and everything he had broken along the way. The judge's gavel slammed down. "We will reconvene in 1 week. In the meantime, Mr. Hall, you are advised to retain legal counsel regarding these financial discrepancies. Court is adjourned." The room began to empty, the buzz of conversation growing louder. But I couldn't focus on the noise. I was still watching my father, watching him fall apart. The facade was gone, and now he was just a man who had betrayed everyone in his life, including me. As I turned to leave, I heard a voice behind me. "Nathan." I froze. Nolan's voice was calm, almost soothing, but there was something in it that made my stomach churn. I didn't turn around. I wasn't ready to face him yet. Not until I knew what he was really after. I took a step forward, then another, each one feeling heavier than the last. But before I could make it to the door, I heard the sound of footsteps following me. I wasn't alone. The door closed behind me with a quiet click, and I stepped into the hallway, my mind racing. Nolan wasn't the only one watching me now. There were others. People who had been waiting for this moment. People who had been lying in the shadows, waiting for the right time to strike. I couldn't trust anyone. And the truth? The truth was just getting started. I hadn't expected it to happen this quickly. The day after the court hearing, my phone buzzed nonstop. Messages piled up, some with simple thinking of you notes, others filled with so much gossip I had to squint to decipher the meaning. My father's name was everywhere. The news was spinning its own version of events, far from the truth. The rumor mill was in full swing, the whispers now louder than the truth. But there was something else in the air, something worse than the gossip. A presence, like being watched. I couldn't escape it. It wasn't just my father's broken empire coming for me. It was Nolan. He had been too quiet. Too calculated. I'd seen him in the courtroom, but now, his absence felt like a shadow clinging to my every move. I tried to shake it off. I tried to go on with my day, to go to work like everything was normal. But every step I took, every conversation I had, felt like it was being observed. My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock on my apartment door. A short, sharp rap. The kind that made your heart skip a beat. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's me," came the muffled voice from the other side. It was Sam, my lawyer. I opened the door immediately, relieved to see a familiar face. He walked in, his eyes scanning the room quickly. He was always this tense, always looking over his shoulder, even in the safest of places. "Your father's playing dirty," Sam said, his voice low. "I've got some bad news. They're planning to countersue." I barely felt my legs as I sank into the chair, the weight of his words hitting harder than I expected. Countersue? For what? Everything. The estate, the trust, everything. And they're using the press. The longer this drags out, the worse it gets. Your father's reputation is already in the gutter. But he still thinks he can win. I rubbed my temples, a headache forming. How? How can he even fight this? The will was clear. Sam shook his head. It's not about the will anymore. It's about him not losing control. He's desperate. And desperate people do crazy things. I wanted to believe him. But in the back of my mind, something else gnawed at me. Nolan. The way he'd been watching me. The way he'd slipped into the courtroom at just the right moment, just when I needed to see him. There was something else happening, something bigger. I've been looking into your father's finances, Sam continued, handing me a file. And I've found something. You're not going to like it. I took the file, my hands trembling slightly as I flipped it open. The first page was a series of bank statements, rows of numbers blurring before my eyes. Sam pointed to a few figures. Look closely. There are several withdrawals over the last 6 months. Large ones. We didn't see these before, until now. My heart raced as I read through the details. The amounts were staggering. But it wasn't just the money. It was the recipients. Each withdrawal seemed to be directed toward the same name. A name I hadn't seen in years. Nolan, I whispered. The truth hit me like a punch to the stomach. Exactly, Sam said. Nolan has been siphoning money from your father's estate. And not just small amounts. Big numbers. This is more than just a financial mess. It's criminal. I shook my head, unable to process it. Nolan had been a part of my life for so long, and now I saw him for what he truly was, nothing but another piece in my father's elaborate web of control. How do you want to play this? Sam asked, leaning in, his voice filled with urgency. I stared at the file, my thoughts a whirlwind. Nolan had to be stopped. But doing so meant confronting him directly, and that would bring everything to the surface. Everything my father had kept hidden. Everything Nolan had helped him bury. We need to confront him, I said, the words coming out sharper than I'd intended. But we need to do it carefully. If we go in too fast, he'll run. We need proof, solid proof. Sam nodded, but his face was tight with worry. This is dangerous, Nathan. Nolan's not some patsy. He's been in this game for too long. And if we push him, he won't just fall back. He'll fight back. I felt my throat tighten. Sam was right. But I couldn't back down. My mother's memory, the inheritance, everything was on the line. Nolan and my father had already stolen too much from me. I'll do whatever it takes, I said, standing up, my voice steady now, despite the storm brewing inside me. We didn't waste any time. Sam pulled out his phone, dialing a number before walking to the other side of the room. I stood there, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Nolan had to be stopped. The quiet that followed was deafening. My apartment, once a place of solitude, now felt like a prison. I moved to the window, looking out at the city below. The streets were bustling, people moving like ants in a colony. They didn't know what was coming, what was slowly gathering momentum. I didn't know how long I stood there, but when I turned back, Sam was looking at me, his phone pressed to his ear. We've got him, he said. We have a lead. I felt the tiniest spark of hope. But as Sam's words sank in, the heaviness returned. Nolan wasn't just a pawn in my father's game. He was a player in his own right. And this was just the beginning. The truth was close, but so was the danger. Get ready, Sam said, eyes narrowing. It's about to get ugly. I didn't need any more warnings. The game had just begun. The silence in the courtroom felt like a slow, suffocating crawl. I sat there, hands clenched on the cold surface of the table, waiting for the judge to speak. His eyes flicked over the documents, pausing on each page longer than necessary. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, the hum of the fluorescent lights filling the gaps in the tension. This will, he began, his voice cutting through the thick air, is legally binding. The decision is final. My pulse quickened. I couldn't decide if it was relief or fear that gripped me. Relief, because the fight was over, or was it just beginning? Fear, because I knew what would come next. The courtroom seemed to shrink around me as my father's face drained of color. He stood, his tall frame rigid, eyes wide in disbelief. The smirk that had been glued to his face during every court session had vanished. You can't do this, he said, his voice wavering, the defiance gone. She doesn't deserve this. The judge held up a hand. Mr. Hall, the will is clear. Your daughter inherits the estate. You are no longer involved in the management of these assets. My father's lips parted, but no words came out. He looked over at the pregnant mistress, standing quietly at his side, the tears welling up in her eyes as if she had already lost something. It was too late. They had lost it all. I could see the shift in my father's demeanor, the towering figure of authority he had always presented now crumbling. It was as if the ground beneath him had opened, swallowing him whole. The control he had built for years, the image he'd fought to maintain, was slipping away. But then, as the courtroom's murmurs died down, a voice broke through the tension. There's one more thing. It was Nolan. He stood from the back of the room, his face calm but his eyes sharp. He was a part of the game, after all, and now he had come to collect his due. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as his words cut through the remaining air. I think there's something you might want to know, Nathan, he said, his voice oozing with subtle malice. That estate you just won? It might not be yours after all. My heart stopped. Every ounce of air seemed to vanish from the room. The papers I had worked so hard to secure, papers I thought had sealed my victory, now felt like nothing more than a fragile illusion. The courtroom gasped. What are you talking about? I demanded, the words tasting bitter as they left my mouth. Nolan smiled, stepping forward, his hand adjusting his tie. Let's just say there are things you don't know. Things about your mother. And your father. Things buried under the surface, hidden away for years. The judge's expression tightened. Mr. Nolan, this is not the time for games. You've made your statement. But Nolan wasn't done. You see, he said, locking eyes with me, this whole thing, the inheritance, the fight over the property, it's only the surface. There are other forces at play, Nathan. Forces you haven't even begun to understand. I could feel my throat close up. I had been fighting for something, fighting for justice, for the truth. But now, Nolan's words were like daggers piercing through every belief I'd held onto. Was everything really a lie? Had my entire life, my mother's wishes, all of it, been part of a twisted game? The judge's voice shook slightly as he called for order. Mr. Nolan, this is absurd. We are concluding this case. But Nolan's smirk only deepened. We'll see about that. I glanced at Sam, whose eyes were darting between Nolan and me. His hand was already reaching for his phone, signaling something to the authorities in the room. But the doubt in his eyes mirrored my own. Nolan was playing a deeper game, one that we were only starting to see. The court was adjourned, but the room didn't empty. It felt like something had shifted, not in the direction we had hoped. The tension was unbearable. The truth, once close, now seemed further away than ever. As I stepped out of the courtroom, my father's figure was nowhere to be seen. His absence was deafening. And I could hear the soft whispers of those who were left behind, his loyal followers, the people who had once looked up to him, now uncertain. The game had changed. I stepped out into the cold, the reality of what had just happened sinking in. The world outside hadn't changed. It kept moving, indifferent to the battle that had just played out in that room. But I had changed. I had won, yes. But I had also lost. Because now I knew, the fight wasn't over. Nolan had given me a taste of the truth, but what lay beneath it, what was buried beneath layers of lies, was something far darker. And no matter how much I tried to turn away, I knew I couldn't escape it. The truth was out there. But I was no longer sure I wanted to find it. The quiet tension settled in my chest, tighter with each breath. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. I'd won this battle, but how many more were coming? And who would be left standing at the end? The game was far from over.